but please have patience with me. I'm also going to be constantly admitting people in as they come forward. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is a really kind of special event because it's Chaminade's first ever inaugural series called Emancipation Day Series. And this came out of the events that have been occurring, of course, over the summer and during this COVID or pandemic. So the mission of the Emancipation Day series is to establish Chaminade University of Honolulu as a site or a gathering place for discussions, lectures, and panels that support and promote public awareness of key post-Civil War events that shape our current definitions of freedom and inform civil rights and racial equity in 21st century America. So this is our first event, and we're going to have another event next Tuesday at noon. That's going to be a little bit different, but today's event is a roundtable discussion with our panelists that is going to be looking at the topic, tired of racial inequity and violence? What can I do? So our panelists include Honorable Retired Judge Sandra Simms, NAACP Hawaii Branch President Alfonso Braggs, Civil Beat journalist Chad Blair, and the Executive Director of Common Cause Hawaii, Sandy Ma. So I just want to set a few ground rules for the housekeeping today. This is a Zoom roundtable discussion, not a traditional Q&A. So after the speakers present on their topics, we have a student moderator, which I'll introduce in a moment, and she will ask specific questions of those particular panelists. But of course, all the panelists will be invited to share their responses. And the panelists will be talking among themselves about what we can do to promote racial and social justice in America through voting. So that means all of you who are not panelists or moderators, please keep your audio muted. And if you do have a question for the speakers, please post them in the chat function. I will do everything I can to make sure your question is answered, but because this is a round table, that might not occur. So if you're willing, send me your email in the post in the chat section, and we'll try to get those questions to the panelists after the event, right? If you find that you need to move around or eat or yawn or stretch during this particular event, please also stop your video so we're not distracted from the viewers of the speakers. And if you would like to hear more about the Emancipation Day series, we have 2 more events occurring, like the presentation next Tuesday at noon, which is called Emancipation Day, American History Overlooked. Please alert me again using the chat function with your email and or phone number, and I will make sure you have all that information. So now I'm going to hand this over to our student moderator, Katherine Gonzalez, who will introduce each panelist before they speak. Kat is a second-year forensic science major with a minor in that is very, very passionate about social justice and issues and advocacy for immigration and issues on reform. And very soon, I believe, we will be addressing her as Dr. Gonzalez. Well, maybe not so soon. She still has to get through med school. And we'll be applauding her decision to help her community give back to those in need. So I will hand this over to you, Kat. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kat. So first, I want to thank all of you guys for coming here. I really appreciate you guys being here today. And we're gonna start with Honorable Sandra Simms, judge. She is a retired judge and a former CUH adjunct. She is a Chicago native who graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago with a BA degree in political science and sociology. Judge Simms later obtained her JD degree from DePauw University College of Law in 1978, and in 1991, Simms became the first African-American female judge in Hawaii upon her appointment to the District Court of the First Circuit. 3 years later, she was appointed to Circuit Court Judge for the First Judicial Circuit by Governor John David Waihe III. Simms retired as a Circuit Court Judge in 2004, and in 2009, she became an adjunct lecturer in criminal justice program at Chaminade University. She published Tales from the Bench, Essays on Life and Justice in 2012. So now Judge Sandra Simms will be giving us a brief history of minority voters in America. Thank you.
Okay. unmuted. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you all for being a part of this, and thank you for including me in this inaugural program. I've done a number of things for Chaminade, including being in the, it says former adjunct. I thought I still was, but okay. But no, nonetheless, today I am going to be talking to you about a little bit about the minority history of voting. And I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of two people in the history of voting rights, Fannie Lou Hamer and Medgar Evers. They both led what I would call contrasting and intersecting lives that centered on securing the right to vote, despite rampant racism, fear, violence, and the continued threat of actual death, just to exercise the right to vote, to secure education, to live and work with dignity in this land of the free and home of the brave. Fannie, and I'm going to refer to them I'm going to talk about them in a sort of a story manner. So forgive me for just referring to them by their first names, because I want you to get a sense of them as real people with real interests involved in this struggle. Fannie came from a sharecropper family, and she actually was a sharecropper. And that's something that most of us cannot even imagine doing, just toiling in the hot sun to pick cotton for literally pennies a day and call that living. That's where she came from. Medgar was a World War II veteran who came home to segregation and bigotry, despite his heroism at Normandy. Like so many Black World War II veterans, their service to the country in no way shielded them from bigotry, racism, and the violence against Blacks that so ravaged the South as it struggled to hold on to the past. Fannie was raised in and lived in part poverty. She had little formal education, but she learned to read and write. And thus she saw in that a window into a different kind of life outside the backbreaking work of cotton picking. With poverty often comes health issues. And of course, she had her share. She was even involuntarily, get this, she was involuntarily sterilized when she had a minor surgery. And that was something that was done in those days to give Black women hysterectomies without their knowledge or consent. It was a pretty common practice. Tragic, we can't even comprehend that now, but that occurred. It was among the galvanizing forces that began her life of pursuing justice. She was, as she famously said, just sick and tired of being sick and tired. She got involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council, known as SNCC, during the freedom rides of early 1960s to register voters in Mississippi. She found her gift of inspiration in music, in her voice. She was a magnificent singer, and that was an inspirational force for the riders and for the marches that ensued. However, so angered by her work to organize, the landowner from which she and her family sharecropped, evicted her entire family from the farm and from the home that was on the property. Yet, though homeless, she continued her work to register voters, as she put it, to register herself. She was arrested more than once, and on one of those occasions, jailed and severely beaten by the police. The beating caused severe internal injuries that plagued her for the rest of her life. But even then, she did not stop. She and the other SNCC volunteers were in another Mississippi jail when they learned that Medgar Evers had been assassinated at his home the night before. Imagine that for a moment. Here you are in jail, having been beaten for your efforts to get the right to vote, and another of your colleagues in that very moment is assassinated on the doorstep of his home. Medgar was an Army veteran. He was college educated and had the audacity to apply to law school at the University of Mississippi in 1954, following the landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision, thinking perhaps that it was applicable to him. But of course it was not, and he was rejected. Not because he was not eligible, but because he was Black, plain and simple. The rejection, though, fueled his NAACP work to desegregate the school, thus paving the way for James Meredith, who became the first Black to attend Mississippi, the University of Mississippi in 1962. White folks weren't happy with his work, and he too was the target of the KKK and other violent supremacist organizations, particularly when he sought to investigate the murder of Emmett Till. Both Fanny and Medgar engaged themselves in relentless activity against segregation, white supremacy, and the countless, almost ingenuous ways that Black folks were denied the right to vote, even though technically we already had it, but some states just refused to accept it. They persisted non-violently, even as unrelenting violence was visited upon them continuously. And then at the 1964 Democratic Convention, Fanny had gathered enough folks to form the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and forced a challenge to the seating of the all-white Mississippi Democrat Party delegation. It was a powerful moment, with her famously challenging the assembly with these words. And I'm quoting from her. I probably won't sound as forceful and as powerful as she did, but I will share what the words that she gave that day. If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. In this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hook because our lives are threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings in America, is this America? It was a dramatic moment in American history and a bold challenge to the convention. She went on to continue her work to register voters and to seek economic empowerment for farm workers in the South. Her death in 1977 was attributed to the host of health issues that had been aggravated by her jail beating in 1963. Heart disease, hypertension, cancer. Sounds familiar. The same things that we're having to deal with now in our minority communities. Medgar's assassination, though, sparked national outrage, much in the way of what we are experiencing today, even without social media. Yet his murderer was not brought to justice until 1994, because all white juries of the 1960s could not bring themselves to convict a white man for killing a Black man. So here we are, folks, in 2020. What are we going to do about that and make certain that Fanny and Medgar's lives and their sacrifice is not in vain? And I move up a little bit. On the day following the surprising election in 2016, when we elected the person who is currently the 45th president, I, like so many others, struggled to understand what had happened. I decided, though, that I would go ahead and attend the opening reception for Karen Hampton's exhibition at the Honolulu Museum of Art, rather than drown my sorrows in alcohol or sink into a deep depression. I halfway figured it was a sign of something, but I went ahead. I just couldn't bear. At the reception, though, I was talking with a number of the millennials and art enthusiasts that I had become to befriend in my time as a docent at the museum. I'm still pretty active there as well. Most of them were in stunned disbelief as to what their future held in this new unfolding world. I spent some time talking to Micah. He was a talented artist, a budding entrepreneur, and a bon vivant, as I call him. Under 30, he's biracial, gay, and we talked a lot. And that's how I learned about new stuff, just, hanging out with the young folks and finding out what they were doing. But now, he was truly frightened. I mean, really, really frightened. What's going to happen to us? What is going to happen to us? He said. Did you vote? I asked. He said, yes, I did. But a lot of my friends did not even vote. They did not even vote. He said it again. They did not even vote. It really bothered him. And for a moment, it bothered me too. I pondered, me, of the generation for whom voting was such a precious opportunity, me, the direct beneficiary of the years of struggle and loss that led to the passage and signing of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and so many other milestones that had culminated in the election of a Barack Obama as president, something so many of our ancestors could not have even conceived. So Mike and I stood there talking about his fears for the future. And finally it dawned on me, Micah was of a generation who grew up with their rights intact. In his growing years, the only president he and his peers knew was Obama. That was their standard. They had not had to fight for the right to vote, or the right to marry, or to be treated equally, or the right to due process. Those battles were not theirs. They had already been won. And now, for the first time in his life, there was a real threat to the life and he and so many other young folks like him had taken for granted. These were the Obama kids, I like to call them. Kids who grew up with an Obama as president, kids who had no concept of blocked dreams, kids who believed, no, kids who knew they could do or be anything they conceived. Their color, ethnicity, sexual orientation was not an issue until it was. In that talk with Micah, it hit me. These kids are gonna have to fight. They never had to do so, but they're gonna have to fight. I said, why? I said, well, Micah, it's on you. It's on you young folks. You guys are gonna have to take it back. And he looked at me and he said, I think you're right. And we're gonna have to fight to keep what was handed to us. And of course, we are now seeing just that. The marches following the inauguration, not just in this country, but all around the world. Folks woke up, women woke up. Now the kids awoke. Things will never be the same. So, and in this era, in state and local elections since then, record numbers of women and young folks have stepped up to the plate, stepped up to take a stand, stepped up to be heard. And in this era of COVID and Black Lives Matter, they are being heard. And they will bring change. And a new paradigm is being forged. But you gotta vote. You gotta vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Sandra Simms. And I made a mistake earlier. I said that she was a former CUH adjunct. I apologize about that. She's still a CUH adjunct. And thank you so much for being here. I apologize about that mistake. But thank you so much. We'll be moving on to Alfonso Braggs. Mr. Braggs is the president of the Hawaii National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a member of the National Board of Directors, and serves as a member on several other professional organizations, such as Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights State Advisory Committee. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Business Management and a Master's in Business Administration. Mr. Braggs will be now discussing why is voting a call to action. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And so I have a presentation sharing. All right, perfect. Okay, so I just want to say that one, let me begin it here. Voting, this call to action. So basically, what is a call to action? And so, it's about mobilizing people. It is about responding to any type of situation that we see here in the community. Recently, this nation obviously witnessed traumatic situations surrounded about racial disparities, discrimination, and in particular, dealing with law enforcement. And when there is a situation within our community, we call people to respond to it. And so this call to action that we are saying about voting is simply that. We're asking people to get out, get involved. You cannot be satisfied with the status quo as it is right now, and that you are the single source that's going to be able to make that difference for everyone. So let me go to the next one here. And I want to start this next one here with going over my final 3 points about this call to action and why voting is such a critical call to action. And so in doing some research, I found a Pew poll that basically said, what's on the hearts and minds of the American people? What are their concerns? What things should the voters as well as the elected officials be concerned about responding to the voters? And it has been said that, hey,
Mr. Braggs, I'm
yes.
going to interrupt you just a moment. Did you have a document you wanted to share with us? Because we're not seeing anything on the screen.
I apologize. I'm going through my presentation here, and I thought for sure I had shared the screen. Okay,
go ahead and
so
share your screen.
Let me share the screen. Okay, and all right, are you guys able now to see the presentation?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So basically there was a Pew Research poll that was done, and it showed those things that are of concern to the American populace. And as you can see the percentages there where, and one thing here, I've got the, there we go. All right. You can see the percentages of concern on the of American citizens. For example, economy was 79% of the people were concerned about the economy. They're concerned about healthcare, Supreme Court appointments. And this is important for us to take note of, and why a call to action is so important. A lot of folks don't pay attention to the fact that the appellate judges are the results of actions at the ballot box. So it's very age. And the call to action on voting is basically to protect your around your quality of life, that of your family, your friends, and your moral and ethical responsibility to global society and your future generations. You also show that you are committed to making your communities, your state, everything a better place when you vote and you participate in that process. You also you don't just end with you being at the ballot box, but that you follow through and you hold these individuals that you elect accountable for the commitments that both of you have made, you by voting and them by earning your vote. You basically get to stand your ground on these particular issues, on all types of issues, as you can see there, where individuals right now are concerned. And these are key issues. This was just done here within the past 2 months. So this is relevant to us today. Some of the reasons why you can see, and basically when the community is involved, when you respond to the call to action, you mobilize and you make sure that everyone is aware of these issues and why it is that you're engaged. Okay, another reason why, my second one, has to do with the fact that when you don't vote, you give up your voice. And that is the most important thing that you can do, is to ensure that your voice is heard. When your voice is heard, guess what? You get to go to the ballot box, and elections are decided by the people who go to the booth and vote. This call to action is also intended to educate the populace on the issues, as well as the positions of the people running for office. An uninformed voter is just as dangerous as an individual who is not voting, because you're casting a misinformed ballot, and that's dangerous. So you need to educate yourself, and part of your call to action needs to be to educate your friends and your families on the issues. And part of this respect for this great constitutional right is not necessarily telling them who to vote for as much as it is empowering them to make an informed decision. Because an informed decision, an empowered voter, also takes on the responsibility of personally holding themselves and others accountable for the actions of the elected officials. When you don't vote, you concede not only your power, but you concede that moral and ethical responsibility that we have as humanity to protect and defend future generations. We owe it to our kids, we owe it to our elders, we owe it to those who believe that they do not have a voice. We owe it to those individuals who cannot get out and vote, to ensure that those voices who have been so oppressed, who have been suppressed, are still being heard. And that's why you have to make sure that you are out there doing all you can to make sure that these votes are properly counted and that justice is being upheld and preserved. Finally, and all encompassing is your opportunity. If you're with the way that things are going on in the local, state, and federal level, then it's important for you to make sure that you vote, because that's the only way that you're going to see change. You also need to know that that change is going to all go beyond just the local level, but it expands all the way through the 3 branches of our federal government. It demonstrates your individual and your collective power. And the most beautiful thing about this is that it doesn't cost an individual to vote. And if it did cost and it's minimal, then that's a great consequence for you to preserve this precious right. And I say that voting is an immutable right so long as you maintain that eligibility. And I think it's important to us to fight for those individuals who have earned and now have re-earned that right to vote. We also need to make sure that we preserve that. What I will leave you with is the words of the late, great Supreme Court Justice, Associate Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. When you see wrong or inequity or injustice, speak out. And when he was informing us to speak out, he wasn't just saying, go on the corner and yell loud. He's telling us to speak out within our homes, at our dinner tables. He's telling us to speak out at the ballot box. He's asking us to speak out because we need to protect what it is that has been so valiantly sacrificed by our ancestors so that we could enjoy these liberties and freedoms that voting allows. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you today. And I hope that it is something that will inspire you to go ahead out, to respond to this call of action and make sure that your vote is counted. Thank you all. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Braggs. Next, we'll be having Chad Blair. He has been a writer and editor and teacher in Honolulu for more than 30 years. He earned a master's degree and a PhD in American Studies from University of Hawaii, Manoa. His dissertation was on democracy in Hawaii, class, race, and gender in local politics, and was published as Money, Color, and Sex in Hawaii Politics, published in 1998. He has taught at the UH Manoa, Honolulu Community College, Hawaii Pacific University, and Chaminade University of Honolulu. As the current politics and opinion editor of Honolulu Civil Beat, Blair covers how political policy decisions impact people and communities in Hawaii. You can also follow Chad Blair on Twitter at ChadBlairCB, and he'll be discussing about voting in Hawaii.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you to everybody. Judge Simms, I am a former adjunct instructor at Chaminade, not a current one. I just wanted to share that with you. Good to see everybody. Really enjoyed the talk from Judge Simms and from Mr. Braggs. And to all those others that are out there listening, thank you for joining us. You know, when I think about the topic of Emancipation Day, the first inaugural one, and congratulations, Dr. Painter, on getting that going, this idea of racial inequity and also violence, racial inequity in particular, it underscores everything that has happened in Hawaii in the last 150 years. Well, really going back to Captain Cook, if you want to the previous century, but it really explains so much about how we get along and how we don't get along, and a lot of the problems we have here when it comes to voting in Hawaii. Of course, we are the only state in the nation that was formerly a kingdom, right? We still have a palace here, right? No other state has a palace. And of course, that's something that we still revere today. But remember, there was a violent overthrow, pretty non-violent in so many ways, but it was violent in the sense that the Native Hawaiians have really suffered under Western contact. And we've seen that population in the 19th century almost decimated because of the diseases that were brought over primarily by white sailors. And that's been really remarkable to see the resurgence of the Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. But when you have that context, it explains so much that goes forward. Because the next 50 years of the 20th century is really a territory. It's run by the United States of America. The president appoints a governor to run the place. Nearly every single one of them is a white male. And the Republican Party is actually in charge in so many ways locally. And then, as some of you who have studied Hawaii history know, 1954 changed everything. This was the territorial legislature. Japanese Americans who had returned from World War II, served bravely, joined with labor unions, particularly with Filipinos working in those unions, working classes, and they overthrew the House and Senate and the territorial legislature. And of course, statehood comes along in 1959. And by the early 60s, the Democrats take over. And that party is really, to understand its origins, is you have to understand race. It really is the Japanese and the Filipinos confronting a white hierarchy, oligarchy, and to some extent, Native Hawaiians that are really divided. There's a lot of Hawaiians that are doing quite well at a certain level, and there are many others that are doing very poorly. And so for the last 60, 70 years, what you've had is one party dominating politics in Hawaii, and it's a Democratic Party. Now, if you're a Democrat, a lot of you are probably happy about that, but there's a lot of Republicans here locally that feel that that's wrong. That you're really not able to consider all the needs, all the concerns of everybody in the state of Hawaii. And even though we elected at least 2 Republican governors in our history, including Linda Lingle, it has not been a representative state in terms of political parties. So we just had our primary in August. When you go to vote, you can't vote, say, for this Senate candidate who's a Democrat, and you can't vote for this council candidate who's running nonpartisan, and you can't vote for this, I don't know, a state legislator who's a Republican or a Green or an independent. You can only pick one party. And that's intentional. The Democratic Party likes it very much that way because, well, no surprise, it's mostly Democrats that get elected to the state legislature, to the governorship, to the lieutenant governorship, to Congress, and that's why they control this party. It's just not fair. When it's the general election, you can actually vote for whoever you want, whichever party that you choose. So in many ways, the system is kind of rigged. That's why our primary is so much more important than our general election, because that's really where all the big races happen. Some races are important in the general election, but it's really the primary that so dominates. So has having the Democrats in Hawaii resulted in a system of equity that we're all very happy in rowing the canoe together, as they like to say? No, there are groups, particularly Pacific Islander groups, including non-Hawaiians, who are heavily overrepresented with health disparities. Native Hawaiians are way disproportionate in the prison and jail system here in Hawaii. White people and some Asian groups, particularly Japanese and Chinese, are doing pretty well overall. The bulk of the homeless population also includes a lot of haole as well. I mean, I don't think I need to explain to anybody on this call right now that there is inequity in the state of Hawaii. And I would include violence, maybe not like Black Lives Matter, maybe not like what we saw in Minnesota with George Floyd and all the other terrible things that we've seen across the country, promising as well, because we're trying to achieve racial justice. But I see violence in the way that it hurts you socioeconomically, the way it hurts people in terms of health, the way it keeps people down and their inability to rise above and to excel in this society. So I did want to touch on the topic that Dr. Painter had laid out for the topic today about racial inequity and violence to help us understand how voting works in Hawaii. I'll add one or two other things. Interestingly enough, we also have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And it's an agency is part of the state, but it's also quasi-independent. And as you might imagine, it's tasked with taking care of Native Hawaiians. This is amazing, but when you look at the actual vote turnout, people almost always leave their votes blank for OHA. It's like 40, 50%. It's nothing compared to, most people will vote for governor, most people will vote for mayor, but when it comes to OHA, a lot of people just don't even bother to pay attention to that, even though you don't have to be Hawaiian to vote for OHA, and even though you don't have to be Hawaiian to run for office. So that's an unusual situation that we have this agency designed to help Native Hawaiians. It dates back to the 1920s and Hawaiian homelands and so forth. But a lot of people stay away from OHA, which I think is something really ironic. I'll point out two other things as well. President Braggs mentioned in his PowerPoint there about how politicians care about money and about who's voting. Am I mischaracterizing how you summarize that? The money thing is so important because class is another part of the dimension of how we look at politics and voting in Hawaii. And class very much tends to be, well, I'll just put it as frankly as I can. The lower classes generally in Hawaii have voted for the Democrats. The upper classes, generally speaking, have voted for Republicans. Some of that's changed under President Trump, and that's another topic we can go into. But the people that have the money, it's the developers, it's these very influential organizations like labor unions who really spend tremendously to sway our elections. And that is one of the big problems, I think, in our politics, period. Thank you to the US Supreme Court and Citizens United. But that is a serious concern. And then I think I'll also just add one point about Judge Simms saying, vote. After you talk to that young man who felt so demoralized after election night in 2016, and boy, what's it going to be like November 3rd? I don't think we're going to know November 3rd who's going to win this presidency because of mail-in voting. But the whole suppression that President Trump is trying to get out about mail-in voting, to cast the doubt that somehow it's fraudulent, that somehow it will lead to a rigged election. Guys, there's no actual evidence of that at all. Voter fraud is very, very rare. What the president is sending is a concern that he's not going to be able to get enough people to re-elect him, because a lot of people who choose to vote by mail, frankly, a lot of them are Democrats. A lot of them are people from lower incomes who have to work multiple jobs, who can't necessarily take a day off. And I think that your call to just vote is so important. And I know Sandy Ma is going to talk about how easy it is to vote here in Hawaii and how mail-in voting is really, I think, improved turnout, not as much as it could be, but it is encouraging. So I could easily go on. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this topic, but I want to be able to give time for Sandy Ma to speak, and I know that your students also have questions. So I'll stop there. Thank you. What do you think of the background, by the way? Do you like the background?
I love it, Dr. Blair. I love it.
It's a shameless plug. Thank you.
So I'm going to just jump in here briefly before we have our last panelist to remind those of you that came in a little bit late that this is not a traditional Q&A session. This is a roundtable discussion. So after our last speaker, Sandy Ma, speaks, then our student moderator, Kat, is going to be asking a couple of questions to some of the select panelists who are then going to respond. And then hopefully the rest of the panel members will also respond and create this discussion. So if you have a question, a burning question, please put it in the chat function and we'll try to get to it if we're not able to. If you're willing to give me your email and or other contact details, I will make sure that your question gets to the correct panelists and they'll have a chance to answer it after the event. So please keep muted after the last panelist speaks because we were going to continue the roundtable discussion. Thank you for that, and I'll hand it over to you, Kathy.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Dr. Blair, for that informational session. And now we're going to go to Sandy Ma. She is Executive Director of Common Cause Hawaii. As Executive Director, Sandy leads campaigns, fundraising, and engages local, state, and national organizations in building coalitions around Hawaii, focusing on ethics and accountability, money and influence, and voting and elections. Sandy has a BA from Johns Hopkins University, a JD from the University of Maryland, a Maryland School of Law, and a LLM Environmental Law from Vermont Law School. That's really cool. And she will be talking about voting in Hawaii here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm trying to share my screen and I am working on my iPad and it's not going so well. Sorry.
Let me know if I need to share my screen for you, Sandy.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I was just going to talk.
Do you want me to share the screen then?
Yeah, if you can.
Sorry. All right, and then just let me know when you want me to change the slides, okay?
Thank you. So actually, I am with Common Cause Hawaii. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. That's just the first screen. And so we work on preserving the core values of American democracy, which includes voting. So thank you for having me. Next slide, please. And thank you for having me at Emancipation Day at Chaminade. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. So I've been asked to talk about, does my vote count? And yes, it does. And you could see why. I'm going to compare the 2016 primary turnout to the 2020 August primary turnout that we just had by mail. You could tell from the 2016 primary turnout that we only had 34.8% voter turnout, which is quite low. And with the 2020 August primary turnout, which was all vote by mail, it went up by approximately 16%, which turned out to be 51% voter turnout. And with even that increased voter turnout by 16% by vote by mail, we are still the lowest in the nation by voter turnout. It is really quite disappointing. As Chad talked about, our August primary, the primary elections are so very important because we are predominantly a one-party state. We are a Democratic state. The Democratic Party controls our state legislature. And so most of our elections are determined by the primary. And so it is incredibly important to vote in the primary elections. And you could tell in the 2016 primary that very few people voted. And then in the August primary, vote by mail caused the turnout to increase to 51%. But still, that is still the lowest turnout in the nation. In high turnout states such as Maine and Minnesota, the turnout is in the 80 percentile range. So that is quite a huge turnout. Next slide, please. And why is that? So I just want to go over some numbers, and I know this is kind of a letdown after all that wonderful presentation by the prior panelists. But you could tell our total population in Hawaii is 1.4 million people. But not every one of those 1.4 million people could vote in Hawaii. Only a little bit over 1.4 million people can vote. And you're thinking, why is that? Well, you know, people under the age of 18 cannot vote. People who are not US citizens cannot vote. People who don't intend to reside in Hawaii cannot vote. For example, people who are just traveling through, don't intend to live here in Hawaii cannot vote. So really our citizen voting age population is only about 1.4 million. And you could see, so these people who are a little bit over a million people, not even everyone who's not every one of the 1 million population are even registered to vote. So our registered population of voters is just for the August primary, this past August primary, a little bit under 800,000. So we don't even have everyone who could vote registered to vote. And of those people who are registered to vote, only half voted in the August primary. And so that is really terrible. So we really need people to vote. And that's why your vote counts so much. You could tell from the August primary, 400,000 is deciding our policies, our laws for a total population of 1.4 million people. That is just astounding to me. That's why your vote counts so much in Hawaii. Our voter registration compared to the rest of the nation is the second lowest. So we need more people registered to vote. We need more people registered to vote. So compared to the rest of the nation, Hawaii has the lowest voter registration, second lowest voter registration, and the lowest voter turnout. So yes, your vote absolutely does count. Your vote is precious because not everyone votes. So yes, it does count. And why does it count so much? Next slide, please. You can register to vote right now. There is an October 5th deadline to register to vote to get your vote mailed to you. For the island of Oahu, the vote ballots are going to be mailed as soon as October 5th when the voter registration deadline expires. So please register to vote as soon as possible. Even our voter registration process is easy. You just go online and you register to vote. You just need your first, last name, date of birth, Hawaii driver's license, or Hawaii state ID, and your last 4 digits of your social security number. Once you're registered to vote, your vote by mail ballot package will be mailed to you. They will start being mailed around October 5th or October 6th, and you should get it on or before October 16th. So it is really simple. Once you get your vote by mail ballot package, you could just vote at home. And as President Braggs has said, you need to be an educated voter. It is simple. You have time to research the ballot, research the candidates at home, at your kitchen table, in front of the TV. You can research it, complete it, and just mail it back by October 27th. The ballot return envelope is postage prepaid. Just drop it in the mailbox and it'll get to the clerk's office to be counted. If you don't remember to mail it back by October 27th, take it to a voter service center or a drop box and it will be sure to get there on time. So it is really simple, the vote by mail process. Don't forget to sign the outside of the return envelope because your signature will be matched against a template on file, and that's how they confirm that it is you that's signed and that is you that's completed the ballot. It's a really simple process. It is safe, it is secure. Like Chad has said, there has been very little evidence, practically none, of voter fraud with the vote by mail process. We are the 5th state that's voted by mail. The other states are Utah, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington State, and we are the 5th state. So please register to vote and then receive your ballot and return it as soon as possible, but no later than October 27th. If you have any questions, next slide, please. Feel free to email me. Feel free to look on our website. We have an alert with all the questions and answers that people commonly have about voting by mail. You could call me, follow us on social media. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ma. So now I'll be conducting the Q&A part of this session. And so I'll be directing some of the questions directly to some of the panelists, but all the panelists are free to answer these questions. So please put in your input as much as you like. I'm gonna start with you, Ms. Ma. So you answered like most of the questions I had for you already. So thank you for that. But also, how can we ensure that people do register to vote? And how can we ensure that college students especially register to vote? Because sometimes they split their time between like here in Hawaii and then back home in the mainland. How do they know which state do they register to vote for? And how can we ensure that they do vote?
That's a great question. Thank you, Kathy. So for Hawaii, the rules are that you have to be 18 years of age to vote in the elections. You have to be a US citizen, and you have to intend to live in Hawaii. So the question is, are they going to be intending to live in Hawaii for them to vote here? And so that's something that they have to really think about. Are they going to be intending to live here to vote here? If they've already registered to vote in a different state, they should cancel that registration and then register to vote here. They could also call the Office of Elections and find out if they qualify to vote here. And I will put the Office of Elections website up in the chat right now.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, because a lot of my friends were asking, they're like, I want to vote, but I don't know which state to register under and how to do that. So I'm pretty sure a lot of students will appreciate that.
Yeah, I will put that information in there.
Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Blair. It is, why do we have political parties and are they necessary for us? And anyone could jump in and answer this question from the panelists as well.
Well, traditionally, political parties have aligned folks with their ideals with a particular platform. So Democrats generally have been for the little guy and for equal rights and for justice, and we could go on and on. Republicans generally have been for this, that, or the other thing. I almost forget now because everything is so topsy-turvy. Now that President Trump is in office, he's really commodified the Republican Party. I myself feel I wish we would move away from parties. It frustrates me that I mean, you can't get rid of them. They've been around for so long. But I want to just add to your question by saying this. When you vote for the legislature, there's parties. When you vote for Congress and you vote for the governor and the lieutenant governor, there's parties. But you know what? At the county level, it doesn't matter. So anybody who's running for mayor or who is running for the city or county council or is running for prosecutor, those are all nonpartisan races. They used to be partisan. They used to be Democrat or Republican. And even in some cases, I think we actually elected a Green Party member to the Hawaii County Council years ago. But voters changed that. We got rid of the party level. So why is that? Why can you have a mayor and a council member who don't have a party, and you have a state legislator or a governor or a member of Congress who does belong to a party? And I would personally like to move away from that because I think it keeps us too stuck with ideologies rather than trying to solve our problems with common sense solutions. But that's historically why we've had parties, and I've now given my own little, I guess I've given my opinion here, but that's how I honestly feel. It ain't gonna happen anytime soon, but you know, it was interesting. We just had a convention for Republicans and Democrats in which hardly anybody showed up except for the Republicans because of COVID. So, you know, politics is changing.
Yeah.
I wanted to add to that. A good point, Chad. It's a good question as to why we do it. But I think it's important to kind of point out, he talked about these parties have representing ideologies and people aligning with those ideologies. We've traditionally thought of the Democratic Party of being, you know, for the little guy, that sort of thing. But when I talked about Fannie Lou Hamer's role in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the Democratic Party of the South during that time was certainly not the party of the little guy. And it certainly wasn't a party of the oppressed, and certainly not a party for Black folks. It was a party of the Ku Klux Klan, the segregationists, and all of those who fought vigorously and violently to ensure that Black folks who actually had the right to vote would not vote. There were impediments put up, and yet you can't even begin to imagine, that suppressed that right to vote. So when that Voting Rights Act was passed, which targeted those states that actually had those really, really active suppression. And most of those, you know, were Democrat states in the South. We're talking Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama. Those were Democrat states. And they were the most, well, yeah, I'm from Chicago, so we can do a whole thing on politics. That's but for the South, I mean, that was the force that just said, you folks are not going to vote, and we're just going to do everything we can to make certain it doesn't happen. And when that changed, they just kind of took over the Democratic Party and changed its perspective. So, you know, and prior to that, it was kind of the Republican Party that was sort of at least in the South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would just quickly add to that. Remember, all those southern states you just mentioned, particularly Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, they're all Republican states now.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of everything's it's actually reversed. Yeah, thanks for reminding that's true too. So again, you go back to this, what does that mean? So when I hear people talk about, you know, something that Republicans did in 1863 with President Lincoln, that's not the Republicans that we're talking about now. That's an entirely different an entirely different era. And so it's like you say, Chad, it almost like what difference is it? What does it matter? You put this label on and say you're Democrat, Republican.
Yes. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're about to be running out of time. So I have one more last question. This question will be for President Braggs. And the question is, how can one person's vote make a difference against racial violence?
Well, first of all, I think I articulated earlier about the fact that your one person, your one vote, your voice, when it is united with other like-minded votes and voices, is actually why we have change in America. Believe it or not, but it has been that one person who may have not thought that their vote counted that actually changed the perspective. You know, you stop and think about one voice, one vote. That one voice and vote on the United States Supreme Court so many times has been what has upheld our inherent rights. So you have to believe that your one vote, the power of your one vote, can truly change the justice system.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you so much for that.
In Hawaii, the one vote really matters. I think Chad can really speak to that too, about how our races sometimes are decided by like 20 votes or something. And so that one vote really matters. And it is so important to vote. And so never think that your one vote cannot make a difference.
It absolutely can. The
Yeah.
last council vote was certainly an example of that.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Judge Simms, Mr. Braggs, Dr. Blair, and Ms. Ma, for being the panelists here today and for having this conversation with us. I really appreciate it. Now I'm gonna pass it on back to Dr. Painter, and she will end this discussion for us. Thank you.
Mahalo, Kat. I want to give a big shout out to Kat for coming on and being our student moderator. Thank you. That was a wonderful job. I think it was her first ever Zoom moderation for a roundtable discussion. And again, thank you to all the panelists. I am so deeply moved that you were willing to take time out of your busy schedules to be part of our inaugural event today. So thank you very much. I did try to write down names of people, but I think there were some answers to other questions that were in the chat. So I'll try and take a look later. I want to invite all of you next Tuesday at noon to come to Zoom again, and I'll send out the link if you're interested. I'll be talking about Emancipation Day and Juneteenth, the history behind it, and some of the kind of evolutions and de-evolutions of that celebration for post-Civil War. So once again, let's put our hands together or bow in honor of our guests. And I do hope that all four of you, Dr. Blair, Honorable Retired Judge Simms, President Braggs, and Sandy May, that you come back and join us again on our campus, whether it's virtual or back on the physical space. So mahalo. Thank you all. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you, students. Mahalo. Thank you, President Babington. You can all log off for finish. I'm just waiting for the last people.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, just give me a second here. Let me just